Welcome to OOTO TV, the out-of-the-office investigation from our past into the future of personal health and psychophysiological actualization. This time, we're discussing neurolinguistic programming, personal health and actualization. I'm Robbins, and with me is Rogers.
It's fantastic to be here, Robbins. We're jumping into a topic today that is, to put it mildly, a bit of a paradox. On one side, you have neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, which is wildly popular. You see it everywhere. In coaching, peak performance, self-help. But on the other side, it's looked at with a whole lot of skepticism from the scientific community. It makes these huge claims, Robbins, the idea that our thoughts, our very words, are literally programming our health. So our job today is to really investigate this as health experts, to see if we can separate the hype from the reality and figure out if this is a legitimate tool for our well-being.
Exactly. And here on OTT TV, we've laid out a roadmap for this investigation to really get to the bottom of it. We're going to kick things off with the absolute foundation of NLP, this honestly mind-bending idea of an invisible map that runs our entire reality. Right, and once we get a handle on that map, we have to put on our detective hats and figure out how in the world it even gets made. We're going to decode what NLP calls the mental software, the very specific filters our brain uses to build our world out of what is just an overwhelming flood of information. Then the investigation gets really practical. We're going to open up the NLP toolkit and look at the actual techniques people are using to make these big changes. This is where we see the programming part in action. And that leads to the most important part for us as physiologists, connecting all of this back to the body. We're going to investigate how these mental tweaks can possibly create real, tangible, measurable changes in our physical health. Right down to the cellular level. And finally, we'll weigh all the evidence. We're going to look at the incredible success stories right alongside the persistent scientific critiques to reach our verdict. Is NLP a revolutionary tool for health? Is it a profound truth about the mind-body connection, or is it maybe just a really clever trick? Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's dive into the absolute cornerstone of NLP. And I'll tell you, this is a concept that can feel like it's bending reality a little bit when you first hear it. The idea is that not a single one of us, nobody, is experiencing reality as it actually is. Nope. We're all living inside this incredibly personalized movie that our own brain is directing, producing, and starring us in. It's our own unique simulation of the world, filtered through every belief, every memory, every value we've ever had.
And Robbins, this question right here on the slide, this is the whole game. It sounds so simple, but from a physiological perspective, the implications are absolutely massive. If we aren't reacting to the world itself, but to our internal idea of it, our map, then our whole stress response, our entire biochemistry, isn't being triggered by what's happening outside of us. That traffic jam isn't what's dumping cortisol into your bloodstream. It's your map of what that traffic jam means to you that's kicking off that entire chemical cascade.
Yes, that is it, exactly. And when you really truly get that distinction, it's like you move from being a passenger in your own life to getting behind the wheel. Suddenly you see this new lever you can pull. You can't control the traffic, right? You can't control the weather or what other people do. But if you can learn how to edit your own map, well, that changes everything. And that is the fundamental promise of neurolinguistic programming.
All right, let's make this real. We're going to do a quick thought experiment. If you can, I want you to just close your eyes for a second. I'm going to give you one tiny, totally neutral piece of information. Person A runs up and hits person B. That's it, nothing more. Now just let that scene play out in your head. What's the story you just instantly created? Who are these people? Where are they? Why did it happen? What's going on?
And don't judge it. Just notice the very first thing that popped into your head. Because this is what's so fascinating, and it's what the founders of NLP really keyed in on. The story you just made up, it tells you almost nothing about the objective event, but it tells you everything about the programming on your internal hard drive. It reveals your map.
So what did you see? In the source material, a couple of classic examples come up. Maybe your brain immediately pictured a boxing ring, a sanctioned MMA fight. In that context, the hit is about sport, aggression, discipline. It's even celebrated. But someone else, with the exact same piece of data, A hits B, might have instantly pictured two little 6-year-old boys in a sandbox fighting over a truck. Now the context is completely different. It's about immaturity, possessiveness, maybe a lack of emotional control.
It's just a brilliant way to see our brain's filtering system live in action, isn't it? The raw data is identical, but the output, the meaning we assign to it, is worlds apart, and we don't consciously choose to do this. Our brain just instantly scans its massive library of past experiences and beliefs to create the story that makes the most sense to it. We're all master storytellers, and we do it so fast, so seamlessly, we forget we're even doing it. We mistake our story for what's really happening.
And this leads us to what is probably the most famous quote in all of NLP, a phrase that just perfectly nails this whole idea. The map is not the territory. Think about it this way. The territory is the actual Amazon rainforest. It's got billions of creatures, unbelievably complex ecosystems, weather patterns. It's infinite in its detail. The map is the satellite image of the rainforest on your phone. It's a useful representation, for sure, but it is not the rainforest. It leaves almost everything out. And yet, we spend our entire lives navigating the world using our mental version of that satellite image. And we totally forget it's just a simplified drawing, not the real thing. We get angry about the pixels on our map, not realizing the territory outside is so much richer.
Okay, Robbins, I'm with you. The idea of the map versus the territory, it makes perfect logical sense. But as someone who studies the human body, this immediately brings up the next critical question for me. What's the actual mechanism here? How does our brain, this 3-pound lump of tissue, actually pull off this incredible trick of data reduction? How are these completely different, personalized maps being built from the exact same sensory input? What is the software that's running this whole show?
Well, the answer starts with a number that it's almost impossible for our brains to really wrap around. Right now, in this very second, as you're listening to my voice, your nervous system is being hammered with an estimated 2 million bits of sensory information. The light from your room, the hum of your electronics, the feeling of your clothes on your skin, the temperature of the air, your own heartbeat. It's just a relentless, overwhelming flood of raw data. Now, look at how our brain acts like the ultimate bouncer at the door of a sensory nightclub. It's incredible. As this chart shows, out of those 2 million bits coming in, our unconscious mind, the part that's running your breathing, your heart, all the background stuff, it processes about 134,000. Still a lot, but a huge reduction. But here's the kicker. The part of you that is consciously aware, the part that's thinking and paying attention, it can only handle about 7 ± 2 bits of information at once. Let's be generous and call it 9. Just stop and think about that for a second. We go from a fire hose of 2 million bits of data down to a tiny eyedropper of 9. That's not just a filter. That's like looking at the entire universe through a microscopic peephole. Our entire conscious reality is built from less than 1/1,000,000 of 1% of what's actually available. Now, from a survival perspective, it's genius. The brain has to make these huge, sweeping decisions about what's important. But it also means our version of reality is a radically edited version of the truth.
It's so true. And NLP says there are 3 main software programs our brain uses to make these edits. First up is deletion. We just flat out ignore most of what's going on. I mean, think about it. Until I brought it up, you probably weren't aware of the feeling of your feet inside your shoes or the specific hum of the lights in your room. Your brain just deleted it. It wasn't important. The second program is distortion. We literally change the data we let in. A new parent who's worried about their baby might hear a tiny little cough in the night and it sounds like a cannon going off, while someone else would sleep right through it. We amplify and shrink data to match our internal state.
And that third one, generalization, is probably the most powerful, but it's also a double-edged sword. It's how we learn so fast. You touch a hot stove once, your brain makes a general rule. Hot, red, metal things are bad. That's useful. It keeps you safe. But it's also where our limiting beliefs come from. You have one bad experience giving a presentation in school, and your brain creates this big, sweeping generalization. I'm a terrible public speaker. And that generalization becomes a program that runs automatically, deleting any evidence that you might be good at it and distorting future experiences to prove itself right. These 3 processes are building our reality moment by moment. You're listening to OOTO TV with research by author Paul Bulow.
So when you start to really understand these powerful, automatic filtering systems, the name Neurolinguistic programming suddenly just clicks. It stops sounding like some weird jargon, and it actually starts to sound like a perfect description of what's happening under the hood.
It really does. Let's just break it down based on what we've been talking about. Neuro, that's our nervous system, the hardware that's taking in those 2 million bits of data. Linguistic, that's the language, the internal stories we use to filter and organize and make sense of that data. It's how we code the experience of person A hits person B. And programming, well, that's the automatic behaviors and emotional reactions that come from running that code. It's actually a brilliant name. It was created back in the 70s by John Grinder, a linguist who is obsessed with language, and Richard Bandler, a mathematician fascinated by patterns. They weren't trying to invent something new. They were trying to reverse engineer what works by modeling the mental programs of highly successful people.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We operate from a map, not reality. And we've just investigated how that map gets built through these filters of deletion, distortion, and generalization. So this is where NLP makes a huge pivot.
It goes from being a theory that describes the mind to a set of tools you can actually use. It's not just about understanding how the machine works, it's about giving you the user's manual so you can get under the hood and start changing the programming yourself.
Which brings us right to a central question for this entire investigation. What are the key elements for neuro-linguistic programming, personal health, and actualization? I mean, if we're going to change our own programming, what does that actually look like? What are these specific tools in the toolkit?
And looking at this list from our sources, it's quite a toolbox. The names themselves are pretty interesting. You've got Circle of Excellence, Metamodel, Collapse Positioning, Reforming Swish. Honestly, Robbins, they sound a bit like techniques from a Jedi mind training manual or something.
They really do, don't they? And I think that's part of the appeal. They're designed to be very specific interventions for very specific kinds of mental code. This isn't about spending years on a couch talking about your problems. These are designed to be precise, targeted updates to your mental software. Some of them, like the Circle of Excellence, are all about installing powerful new positive states. Others, like Quick Phobia Care or the eye integration technique, are about going in and debugging old code, resolving past traumas and limitations. Why don't we look at a couple of the most famous ones to see how they actually work?
The Circle of Excellence is an absolute classic, and it's one of my favorites. Just imagine for a second having the ability to summon your most confident, most calm, most resourceful self right on command, just before you walk into a huge presentation or have a really difficult conversation. That's what this is all about. It uses a process called anchoring. You literally use your imagination to create a space on the floor in front of you, your circle. And then you vividly remember times when you felt absolutely unstoppable, totally clear-headed, completely powerful. You see what you saw, you hear what you heard, and you really feel those feelings, cranking them up, and then mentally placing them into that circle. Then, by physically stepping into that circle, you're creating a neural association. Your brain learns that this spot right here equals my peak emotional state. It's like building a physiological on-switch for your best self. And then you've got something like the eye integration technique, which goes into much deeper, more therapeutic work. As our source material points out, it's very similar, at least in concept, to the well-established therapy known as EMDR. The idea here is that traumatic memories can get neurologically stuck. They're not filed away properly as past events, so they can get triggered and feel just as intense as if they were happening right now. NLP pioneers noticed that when people access these stuck memories, their eyes tend to lock into a specific position. So this technique uses guided eye movements to basically force the brain to access different neural pathways while holding that memory in mind. And from a neurological perspective, that's just fascinating. The theory is you're preventing the brain from running that old, worn-out traumatic circuit over and over again. By making the eyes move, you're engaging different parts of the brain, forcing it to reevaluate and refile that memory in a new way. It helps to basically snip the wire between the memory and that intense fight-or-flight emotional charge. The fact that this mirrors a clinically validated therapy like EMDR is really significant. It suggests there's a real, repeatable neurological process at work here, not just some kind of positive thinking. Okay, Robbins, this is all incredibly compelling when we're talking about changing thought patterns and emotional states. But this right here, this is the absolute heart of our investigation today. As health experts, we have to ask the most important question. How can neuro-linguistic programming, personal health and actualization actually affect our mental and physical health? I mean, it's one thing to change a mindset, but where is the bridge between rewriting these mental stories and creating real, measurable changes in our biology? This is it, Rogers, the critical connection. And this table from our source gives us some of the most compelling evidence out there. This comes from a study working with psychiatric patients, people dealing with really severe, often life-derailing psychological issues. Just look at the patterns. Take male number 1, anxiety attacks, fear of failure. After specific NLP interventions like collapse positioning and quick phobia care, you see improved social skills, better emotional control. Or look at female number 1, suffering from severe anxiety because of past trauma. One technique, the unconscious reforming pattern, leads to a decrease in the severity of her panic attacks. What's really striking to me here is not just the outcomes, but the specificity and what seems to be the speed of these changes. Look at female number 2, depression and trauma from spousal abuse. That is an incredibly complex and difficult situation. The interventions are targeted, identity model, quick phobia care, and the outcome is just profound. Freed from depression and unpleasant experiences, rebuilding life. In traditional therapy, that can take years. These results, which NLP practitioners say can often happen in just a few sessions, are just extraordinary. They really are. And we see it again and again. Male number 3, dealing with anxiety and insomnia. A few sessions later, he's regained his motivation.
So when you see this data laid out so clearly, it really forces us to answer the question, can neuro-linguistic programming, personal health, and actualization improve our human health? Based on this clinical evidence right here, the answer from this study seems to be a resounding yes.
So, with the power of those case studies as our foundation, we can confidently make that leap from the psychological to the physiological. The whole idea rests on this one connection. When you give people the tools to resolve trauma, to turn down the volume on anxiety, to overcome limiting beliefs, you are not just changing their mind. You are fundamentally changing the chemical signals being sent throughout their entire body. And that's why the evidence from neuro-linguistic programming, personal health, and actualization studies suggest that NLP may be good for health.
That is a very powerful statement, Robbins. You're drawing a direct line from a psychological technique to something as fundamental as cellular growth. Help me connect those dots. Well, think of your body as a giant chemical factory. Your thoughts and emotions are the managers running the factory floor, telling the workers what to produce. When you're stuck in a state of chronic stress or anxiety or anger, those managers are constantly screaming, "Emergency, red alert!" The factory then floods your entire system with stress hormones like cortisol. That's a catabolic state. It's designed for short-term survival by breaking things down for quick energy. Your immune system is suppressed, digestion shuts down, repair processes get put on hold. But if you use an NLP technique to resolve the psychological thing that's causing the stress, you're essentially telling the factory managers, okay, all clear, the emergency's over. And the factory immediately shifts production to hormones and neurotransmitters that are all about calm, repair, and growth. You are literally changing your body's internal chemistry from a state of breakdown to a state of rebuilding. And that is how neurolinguistic programming, personal health, and actualization creates a healthy environment for cellular growth and success. You're listening to OOTOT TV with research by author Paul Bulow.
Okay, now you're taking it even one level deeper, all the way down to our mitochondria, the actual power plants inside every single one of our cells. That's a bold claim, Robbins. How does a thought pattern technique impact cellular energy? It's the exact same biochemical logic, just taken a step further. We know from tons and tons of research that chronic elevated cortisol is basically poison for our bodies. And one of its most damaging effects is that it hammers our mitochondrial function. It essentially clogs up the machinery of those tiny energy factories inside our cells. That leads directly to fatigue, inflammation, and it's a huge driver of the aging process. So any approach, whether it's meditation or exercise or, as these studies suggest, NLP, that can effectively and quickly lower that chronic cortisol load is, by definition, protecting our mitochondria. You're removing a primary source of biochemical damage at the most fundamental level of our biology. And that is why I am comfortable making the statement that exposure to neuro-linguistic programming, personal health, and actualization is critical to our mitochondrial health.
Okay, so the case studies are powerful stories, and the biological theory makes sense. But to really convince a skeptic, we need more than that. We need hard, quantitative data. Is there anything beyond individual success stories?
There is, and this is where things get really exciting for those of us who like to see the numbers. Let's look at this 2025 randomized controlled trial. They took a group of mothers of adolescents, a group I think we can all agree is under a fair bit of stress, and they split them into 3 groups. The big takeaway, as you can see right here, is that the group that combined yoga with NLP saw the most significant improvements across every single key health marker.
And we're not just talking about them saying they feel less stressed. These are real, measurable physiological changes. We're talking reduced blood pressure, a lower resting heart rate, and, this is the big one, a measurable decrease in salivary cortisol. Cortisol is our #1 stress hormone. When you can show a drop in it like that, it proves that the intervention is physically calming down the body's core stress response system. This is the mind-body connection proven in black and white.
So when we put all these pieces of our investigation together, you've got the rapid, life-changing results in the case studies. You've got the clear biochemical link between our mental state and our cellular health, and now you've got the measurable physiological improvements in a controlled trial. We can draw a pretty powerful conclusion. By effectively giving people the tool to manage chronic stress, which we know is a toxic root of so much modern illness, we can confidently state that neurolinguistic programming, personal health, and actualization can be linked to preventing illness and increasing longevity.
It's just a logical chain of evidence, really. We know that chronic stress is a primary driver of almost every major modern disease. Heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, you name it. So it stands to reason that any tool that gives an individual real power over their chronic stress response is, by its very nature, a powerful tool for preventative health.
All right, Robbins, you've built a really strong case based on the evidence we have in front of us. The outcomes from these studies are really hard to argue with. But We would be failing in our duty as investigators here on OOTT-TV if we didn't talk about the big elephant in the room, the significant, persistent criticism that has followed NLP for decades. Despite results like these, a huge part of the academic and scientific world just dismisses it. We have to look at that criticism head-on if we're going to get the full picture.
And let's be really clear about the scientific argument against NLP. As the source material itself acknowledges, critics say it's not one single unified theory that you can actually test. It's more like a loose collection of models and techniques that have been sort of bolted together over the years. And its intense focus on a person's subjective experience makes it an absolute nightmare to study in the large-scale, double-blind trials that are the gold standard for clinical proof. And core ideas like the map is not the territory, well, they're useful metaphors, but they're philosophical ideas, not scientific hypotheses you can prove or disprove. From a position of strict scientific rigor, these are really serious, valid criticisms. And they are. They're absolutely valid points if you're looking at it from that specific worldview. But now let's look at the other side of the scale. While the academics are debating the definitions and the methodology, the evidence we've just looked at shows that this practical tool gets results. That yoga and NLP trial shows real measurable drops in cortisol. Those case studies show people with deep, real trauma getting their lives back. So here's the question that I keep coming back to. For that 36-year-old woman who is finally free from the trauma of abuse, does it really matter if the tool that helped her is philosophically elegant or scientifically falsifiable? Or does the outcome matter? NLP doesn't claim to be some perfect scientific theory of everything. It claims to be a functional model of the mind. It's less concerned with why it works in a way that satisfies a research journal, and it's far more concerned with the fact that it works to empower people and give them their lives back. And in that arena, the results are pretty hard to deny.
And, that ultimately brings this whole investigation right back to the only person who can truly test these ideas, and that's you, the listener. We've gone through the theory, the tools, the evidence, and the debate. But at the end of the day, the only map that truly matters is the one inside your own mind. That map, with all its current roads and its boundaries and its danger zones, it has brought you to this exact moment in your life and in your health. So we'll leave you with this final question. Knowing that you're the one who draws the map, knowing you're the one holding the pen, and knowing that the map you draw directly influences the health of your body, where will you draw your map next?
A fantastic question to end on. Thank you all for joining us for this investigation on OTO TV.